All right. So I think last week, Tim reached out about a direction page called Allow or Version Dependencies. And we started brainstorming some jobs to be done between the release and package stage. And we created this issue. Actually, Tim created this issue, and I added some thoughts to it. But Tim, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it came I think there was three sources that I would credit for the idea for this. One would be Nathan opening the idea for adding semantic versioning to releases. That was kind of the original impetus. And then for the Q1 product OKRs, we were doing competitive analysis of some of our competitive products for package. And they each offer a similar offering to this. So the idea that you can distribute release bundles to an arbitrary amount of machines, and that you may want to include packages and images. And then shortly after that, I had one of our longtime enterprise customers reach out and say, do you offer anything like this? What we really need, and their use case is a little special. They basically need to take a release bundle and distribute it to a bunch of IoT devices that have limited internet connectivity. But if you take out the IoT and limited connectivity, still the idea that people want to create a release bundle and then they want to include immutable images and packages as part of it, and then they want to distribute that to other machines. That's kind of the use case that I heard from the customer and from at least what I've seen from our competitors as well.
So on the releases side, we have a lot of this sort of already kind of framed out on the releases page with the releases tag and the ability to add asset links. I think the parts that are a little bit trickier are around supporting something like the packages in the releases page, but also making it discoverable for those who have to consume those packages or binaries, especially if, let's say, there's a version that they have, this customer has, they want people to use, and then they have another release that's an in-progress version that people can build on top of that they're distributing, but they want to have an immutable piece of it. So we don't support like that. Once you link something to a release asset, that artifact can expire. So there isn't like a persistability of that today. So that's a part that we should think about or talk about in addition to just expanding any release capabilities to support other package features. And then I wanted, go ahead.
Does that mean something like once you, almost like a protected branch, like once you protect it, it can't be adjusted except by someone who has maintainer rights, but instead of a branch, it's a release bundle? So the idea is like is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, so that could be one way to solution that. The other one would just be to store the items in a different way so that people can access them and they don't expire. We're kind of exploring this with JUnit reports in the artifacts. So it's like it's just changing how it's stored so it doesn't expire.
Okay.
We have heard from the package side, when we've talked to our users, there's a couple different reasons they want to create versions of packages or specific images that can't expire or can't move. So it could be that we follow on that same logic, and if it's part of a release, it is inherently protected, and then it just stays there, again, unless a maintainer starts to get involved. So that might nicely align with some of the other ideas that we're looking at around protected assets for package.
We have a couple of like job stories that Tim added to the issue. One of them is when I create images, I want to have a distribution model of those packages for others to consume so that we can use artifacts across many devices. I think today we do have customers in the embedded software space that are uploading an external link to their releases page that's to like an artifactory or to even a container or package registry, and they have that release published for people to then consume and download. So this is something that customers are doing today. I think the part that gets a little weird is if we want to support the native functionality of like attaching a package and having a separate section inside the releases page. that's something that we have as an open issue today. And not sure if we'd want to start delivering against that to create better visibility between packages and releases.
I think, but sorry, just to clarify, what you are saying is we can do it today. It's just they don't get any distinction that it's a
Right.
package on the release page. I think that's okay to start. And maybe the fastest thing we could do is just share some like documentation on how to do this. And just show people like a sample workflow of, we have an image, we have a package, and we have some other artifacts. We add them to the release, and this is how you do it. And then from there, we could have, we can see what happens. But that's probably like the easiest thing we could do, is just make it clear for the package stage, at least, that this is a workflow that you could do. It's supported today, and that there's a workaround. And then in the future, if we had something like the semantic versioning as an environment variable or something like that, it would be very easy to just add them without having to create your own variable or without having to move anything manually. It'll just automatically happen.
When you're talking about this environment variable, are you thinking, is it a variable that would contain like the latest version that's been published? Is that kind of what
That's what my thought was, but that might not be possible or or reasonable or anything like that. But naively, that's the way that I was thinking about it, is that you would just add like a release variable, and that like upticks over time. But I'm not sure how that would even work, honestly. I was hoping you would be like, oh yeah, I could totally do that.
Yeah, I think we could do that. I don't know if that would make the most sense, or if we already had like a bunch of releases that had, say we were already using semantic version, we could kind of just read all the list and then look at the highest one and increment it that way. Like we wouldn't necessarily have to keep a variable around for that.
Oh, that's cool.
But the end effect, I think, would be the same. Basically a way to have kind of get the latest version that's currently published and then be able to get the next version.
That's right. Maybe the best one thing I could do to help, just thinking about the documentation, is, Jackie, you shared the release evidence page with me and the documentation. Maybe I could create just like a video demonstrating how to do that.
We could do like oh, go ahead. Sorry, my headphones like cut out. I thought you were finished talking.
I was just
having a release tag published for an embedded software use case, or for an air gap use case as well. Because when we think about inner sourcing, embedded software, and air gap, all of these customers are looking for a published state of their current code for internal users to consume. So this is something that we can create like a blog post about and talk about the benefits of using a release tag, in addition to linking to a container registry or package registry for people to then consume that as an asset link. I think that you're absolutely right. We can do a recording and have that be a consumable, but there's also something to like connect upstream to like other pieces of GitLab to showcase this functionality, as it's not very discoverable.
That's true. I like that. Our customers would be interested in contributing to that and kind of like documenting their workflow.
For sure. I have two in mind. One of them is with an embedded software company. He's using releases today, and he's very interested in being able to upload assets to releases so that he can accomplish this exactly. Right now, he's just creating links artificially. Well, not artificially, but creating an asset link. Okay. So I have one in mind that we can ask about.
Ian, what are we not talking about?
I don't know. Way to put me on the spot there, Mr. Tim.
Sorry.
I am kind of thinking from the other direction of ways that we could, if discoverability is an aspect of it, to bring it into the package UI, where we could say, if you look up a package, you can see that it's attached to a release. So working the other way, and it also kind of ties into that it's protected and here's why idea. But it seems like we should probably focus on the other end, and if it is popular and used and really helping our users, then start surfacing it in the package UI.
You know, I was thinking about this about 2 weeks ago. On the releases page, if there was a tab that talks about associated packages to releases, so that we are giving people a self-serve place of all the artifacts that they would want to be releasing on a single page. I don't really like the idea of tabs, but being able to create a distinguish, but also a centralized place for managing all the release artifacts is something our users are very interested in. And I think a tab would allow us to sort of consume the package information without having it be nested inside of all of the releases stuff.
Just a question, because I don't have the data. When people are working on releases and you've been talking to customers, how many of these package related artifacts tend to be tied to a single release? Are they looking at one specific image tag, or is this a large collection of different objects that they need to be managing?
So it's a wide variety, and it depends on what the customer is using releases for. So if they're using releases to tag a continuous delivery life cycle, it can be an image that's used across hundreds and hundreds of release tags, right? If it's a monthly cadence that they're then packaging all of these MRs, and the release is actually a container that's representative but not actually connected to contents of a release. So for example, they may associate a milestone to then capture the MRs and issues, but that tag is not a commit tied to a production instance or production code. It's a bucket that then is a relationship of all the stuff that could be representative of production code. And the release evidence is all the things that are contained within that issue and MR and that bucket that might be then linked to an external image that contains all of the contents of that release. Does that make sense? So it would be a single package that is then stored somewhere externally, and then that's what's published as a part of the release. And there's some places in between too, where like they have a latest version that their internal customers are using from an inner sourcing use case, but then they have a release tag that says upcoming, and it will be then updated with, you know, the future release contents.
One feature that I think might be important that for the package stage is to have a generic package manager as well. Because I think right now we're supporting like NPM and Maven, but really people just need to be able to upload arbitrary binary files as well. And I think if we can get that added, that will be a big piece to these releases as well. Because I've heard a lot of people also ask for that as part of that. They want to be able to add arbitrary files to a release, which I guess they could do.
Go ahead.
They could do, right? But it's not exact. I guess they're looking more for like an arbitrary package manager, right? You'd just be able to upload files with a single endpoint.
That's exactly, yeah. And that's kind of what we're thinking with how we're going to support uploading binary files to releases is using, I think I called it a generic package registry. So
yeah.
it's where we would leverage the documentation you linked before, and then they'd be able to just upload things to that release package.
Okay.
Container.
And do you have, are any of the, oh, go ahead, Sean, sorry.
I was going to say, and as I understand it, that registry will be only for lease assets.
I think we could probably expand it to cover anything, because I think people would use it beyond just releases. But I'm not sure. We're planning on, do you have that in your backlog at all or on your roadmap?
Yeah, but just as what Sean was saying, we kind of are restricting it just to the release contents that people are uploading. But when I think about that, it's technically it'd probably be flexible enough that it could contain any given package that people are uploading to the release. So it doesn't really, it is arbitrary.
Yeah, in fact, I think the reason we even chose to create a new registry was just to separate it from everything else. But yeah, I mean, I guess it could potentially store anything really if it made sense.
Okay. I was thinking these are all great ideas, and I think driving cross-stage usage at GitLab is really valuable. That's according to the growth team. So I'm wondering how, let's say that we add some of these features, what metrics could we use to say at the end of the day that we were successful? Like what cross-stage metrics would be useful?
So let me pull up the issue, because I think what part of that issue that I found success metrics would be people are utilizing our package registry from a release page, right? So it would be like a UTM source code release page, and it links them to a package registry. I don't know if that's like trackable, but it would be one way to indicate that we have populated cross.
Yeah, we would. How would we track that? I guess we would have to know if there was a package included in that page.
Yeah, so we'd be able to, it could be a configuration option that we add to that's, hey, enable packages for releases, and it's a section that people turn on and off, and that would be a really easy way to indicate that people have it turned on. Don't think that's the best way though.
If we had the idea of protected images or packages, we could use that as a proxy. We could say that when an image or a package is protected, that naturally they're being tagged for a release. So that might be one way we could do it. Or I mean, in general though, what we're trying to do is increase the usage of the release evidence page, right? And and releases in general. So maybe we should predict, that should be the prediction that we make, is that we see an increased adoption of releases.
Yeah, and the action would be, we could have it multiple, like if we wanted to say that we want to drive the UI traffic, it would be people uploading an asset or binary from the UI. And then that would be one way to track it too, across stage.
Okay.
Hey, one question I have, it depends a little bit too how we implement it, because if we are thinking that this association between a package and a release would be something that's automatic, or maybe I should say if it's not automatic, if it's something that they have to explicitly do, that would be an easy measure to track. It's just how many releases are associated with the package or vice versa. But if it's something automatic that we can somehow automatically do it, which would kind of be cool, then we can't really track that 'cause it's an automatic thing. But yeah, just a thought there.
Has anyone used any tools that do this, that handle semantic versioning and create release bundles? Maybe Nathan or Sean, have you both used a feature like this before?
There's a couple libraries out there that are fairly popular that will kind of automate a lot of your releasing, especially with NPM packages, I know. So they'll increment versions based on commit messages, and they'll automatically publish them.
That's cool.
And so then I haven't played around with them enough to know how they would tie into, for example, our releases. Like they probably wouldn't work with GitLab releases by default. On GitHub, a tag kind of is a release, so they'd kind of get that for free. Trying to remember what that, I'll look up real quick what that is called, but there are a few tools out there.
Okay, that'd be helpful for me too, to just see what else is out there and get an idea of how we could stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, I can't think of anything specific, but yeah, we can certainly have a look.
Okay.
But,
I'll create a tech evaluation issue for releases then, Sean and Nathan, and we can add that to our backlog as a release P1.
Awesome.
I just put that in the chat. I think that's the one I'm thinking of, semantic release. And the idea is that you commit a chain. Yeah, in your commit message, you say something like feature, like you have little tags that you include in when you're coding and actually make the commit, and then it will go through and based on those commit messages, publish them to NPM or do other automation like that. So that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. Oops.
Okay, we have a couple of other jobs to be done that we were flirting with as a part of this functionality. The second one is when I create different versions of artifacts, I want those to be stored in a central immutable place for easy access and version control, so devices and users can consume the latest artifacts and release bundles. So this sort of ties back to, Nathan, what you're saying about automatically incrementing versions and making that easier. If we have that in the releases page, that would be a central location. But I think we need to solve for that cross-linking of how many, like if people are storing items in a package and where we want that to be located.
quick question on that one. So when we say, storing a releases page, like we currently support, external resources such as S3 or whatever, but are we specifically interested in what we're storing in our to be built package registry? Or do we just care if it's on the release page?
Can you
So
answer that again? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So we currently support assets that are externally stored, for example, in an S3 bucket. And at some future point we'll have our own package registry or private registry or whoever it's going to look to store those assets. But are we interested in everything that's on that release page, whether it's inside of the GitLab package registry or whether it's some external resource? Does it matter if it's on the release page? Are we tracking it, or are we only tracking it if it's internally stored?
My opinion is that if they add it to a release, it should be available, because they could add any arbitrary content. I think that, like, for video games, they may add some like video recordings that they want to share with the release, maybe.
Yeah. So that means that today we currently do support some version of this, right? Because we can,
So it sounds like, Jackie, would you say this is like an appropriate steps to be had? One, it would be like some documentation and or a blog post potentially with a customer demonstrating how to do this. From the package side, what we need to work on is a way of protecting packages and images to make them immutable once they've been identified as such. We also we want to create a generic package manager. That's on our roadmap, by the way, in like 13.4. So if you all don't get to it before then, we naturally will get to it. So I think there could be some.
I think I have it for 13 too.
Okay.
So we might be like,
we'll see what happens.
Duking it out there, yeah.
And then from the release side, we want a way to create an add-on to semantic versions for releases, and then we want a way to make those once the semantic version has been created and released, that some way of protecting it so that it also can be immutable.
Yes.
And in terms of distribution of releases, that can happen naturally, because I think Sean was mentioning it's on S3, so it's already distributed and easy to grab. Okay. I think that sounds like a good plan.
I said S3, but in fact, it's actually on any external resource, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not on the GitLab object storage.
So it's user specified or
exactly
specified.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool.
Can I just share my screen real quick and I feel like I'm a little lost. Is this kind of what we're talking about here? Like, we have a version and we have these asset links.
Right.
Is that kind of what we're talking about, like linking a package as one of these assets?
Or customers are doing that today as is. So they're using an asset link. What I was thinking is creating a separate section that is dedicated to packages that would probably reuse the same functionality, but it's to improve the visibility of package linking. And then if there's other things that we would want to like automatically do from the YAML file, like this package is tied to this release, then we'd be able to populate that with the release CLI.
Sorry, Jackie, do you mind just repeating that? So we have another section.
So the intent here is things can get lost in the asset section. So for example, let me share my screen real quick. So if we look at the runner project, for example, they have lots of stuff in their asset links. And as a result, it's not discoverable. It's not easy to like really, it's not letting me like share it right now. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So all of these assets are linked here, and it's not necessarily discoverable. And some of our customers have different packages or images that can be in the hundreds because they're supporting lots of different devices.
Mm-hmm.
So this list could get really hairy or very long because it's any sort of thing that you want to link to your release. So in order to make it discoverable, it could be a separate section or a different way to distinguish it than just an asset. But that's just like today people are doing exactly what we're saying you should do. It's just not the best user experience.
So is it something kind of like this where we'd have,
Right.
get this out of the way, where we'd have like a packages section down there. That's kind of what,
Right.
just to make it more obvious, like what the different
Yeah.
things are.
Exactly.
Okay.
I completely agree with that, Jackie. Particularly as the example you pointed out, when there's many different binaries. Is it something we could progress towards? Because you can see, I mean, you can have subcategories, and I mean, there could be all sorts of categorizations. You could have labels. Is it something that we could progress towards, you know, as a simple iteration to perhaps just, as you're saying, just put it as its own section to start with, and then move towards some type of more granular classification of those assets?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't see why not. Today, we just have to be mindful of how many things we include on that detailed view and what that page looks like. Because as we start to populate like an auto change log, if we look at our current releases page from GitLab.com, you can see that if people are auto-populating a change log on that same releases page, you could just be scrolling for ages, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be kind of choosy about what's the important information that users want. And if we compare it to other tools that are publishing releases, binaries, release notes, tag identification, and audit compliance information are the 4 classifications of information. So we just have to be mindful about all the things that we're adding.
I guess like on the page at the moment, we already have a number of different categories of files, right? Because we have, the code that's automatically generated in the 3 different formats. We're going to now add links to some type of package registry, and then we also have our existing links to anywhere, right, to the S3 bucket or whatever. And so that's already 3 categories. And so do we want to, I don't know, somehow make them one category? Because as you're pointing out, there's all this other stuff on the page as well.
We don't really want to make them one category because that makes them very undiscoverable. So there's, in the validation that we did, Hayan and I did, around the view page and what people are looking to see, they want to see first the contents of the release, which is why the release progress view is at the top, from like an issues and MRs included in the release. The second that they want to see is things that are inextricably tied to that release that others are going to consume. So this includes your packages if you have them, and today that means assets are second because that's the only way people can link images or other consumables to a release. But the intent will be that there's a more elegant solution, and maybe it's actually a link to a different window that's like packages tied to this release, and it links out to a different window so that it isn't just a series of package links on the releases page. But again, like the reason why assets are so long right now is because that is a second priority for users when they look at releases, is what are the things in this release that others are consuming that I want to see. And then finally, like evidence collection is at the very bottom because users are not always interfacing with it as a developer or as an external party.
Yeah, I mean, while the evidence is, very important, it's a limited number of users would actually
Totally.
would use it. Yeah.
So I feel pretty strongly about not having just an expansive scroll of a releases page. And we have to think very thoughtfully about how do we generate traction to link off of the releases page into other parts of GitLab while still containing the relevant information on the releases page, and making it really easy to see at a glance, like, well, what's in this release, right?
When you've been talking to your users,
have I been talking?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Oh.
you. I'm just curious if on the releases page, if they have a large number of images and packages and different categories of things, if we could actually surface on that overall scrolling page, just it contains 13 packages, 2 images, and 13 auxiliary artifacts. And then you can create a subpage where if I'm a user that actually cares about the packages, because I'm an engineer more likely, I can go there. If I need the container because I'm on deployment, I can just go to that section and start kind of walling off the different pieces.
So you're totally in our heads. You're reading exactly what we're seeing too. So thank you for being there with me. And that's really affirming to hear somebody else say those things as well. So we're expecting to create a fork between the project landing page and the release version view page. So the release landing page, which is when you go to the project overview and you click releases, we're expecting it to be more like badges, like counters with the release progress view. And that way people can then click into specific sections. Not quite sure how many pages we can support as subpages and what really makes sense there, because today we only have the release landing page and the release view page. And the release view page could really be an infinite scroll because it could contain everything about that specific version. And people have higher tolerance for that. But being able to create at a glance all the things that are in a release is really important for people who are managing across multiple releases or multiple projects too. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, we also received quite some feedback on people wanting to have the ability to filter search and then just search, try to find specific information in the release page, and having all this data in the overview when you have at least 20 releases per page, it becomes just too difficult.
And
then just as a quick demo of that, we already have that individual page. So this is like the main releases page, and then you can click on the title, and currently it gives you the exact same view, but it's just the one. So we could definitely differentiate this page versus the previous one.
And that's what we really need to do, because today they're just duplication. And when you have for the customers who are doing continuous delivery and they're tagging each commit with a release tag, for example, and then they have like a batch job that they do external to the system to aggregate all those release tags, that can be really onerous to look at the releases page. People probably are not going to it as much as they would want to in those cases.
One other note I wanted to mention, talking about the different types of assets, currently we're working on associating a type to a link in this issue. So we're kind of already going down that road of categorizing things. So it might make sense to add a package type. Like that might be an easy way to implement that.
Yeah, and that's exactly the MVC that I was trying to go after with that issue, was to allow us to not only specify the runbook, because the runbook is one asset that's really important to the release manager. So to be able to discover that is important, but you're absolutely right. Like packages or arbitrary links is really important. Totally.
Just a note, if you're starting to categorize things, when we've been talking to users, and I'm sure this sounds familiar to a lot of people, but images and packages are two very different ideas. So I may suggest that they have their own individual categories. And even from there, I don't know how valuable it would be. I would want to check with your users about different package types, because sometimes that can have a difference in how they're interpreting things. So if it's an NPM package and it's just for the front end, it's not as important as like the Python package that manages a whole part of, the AI network is a big deal. So those are two different like category options that you could explore. But definitely the images and packages, they do feel very different for at least the users we've talked to. I don't think I've talked to a release manager yet. I'm going to add that to my list.
So Nathan, I just updated that links issue with 2 other categories, package, image. So now it reads run book, package, image, and other.
Sounds good. One question about the package. If we would link to a package, I am not super familiar with, I don't know if we've changed the package screen lately, but like, is there a dedicated page for a specific version of a package, or is it just a package with a list of all its versions? Like what would be the best way to link to it?
Yeah, right now, each package version has its own page. We're working on creating a tab that is you're looking at this version of the package, and then here's all of the other versions of that package. But as it stands now, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can link directly to a package of a specific version. And it has its own dedicated page and all of its details are associated there.
Yeah, but starting in 2 weeks, I think it's going to be the name, like a package name is going to be the unique identifier, and it'll be more like the NPM registry, where when you go, like you don't search and see 40 different versions of the React package, for instance. Like you go to the main React package and they see a versions tab on that page. So we're going to have something like that. But still, there's no reason that you wouldn't be able to link to a specific version, I don't think. I had to try to explain why we were doing that in a release post. It's actually very complicated to explain nesting in words that, in 2 sentences that anyone who's never read anything could understand. I was like going back to atomic definitions. I was like, a package is published with a name and a version. Names change seldomly. And I was like, this I have to figure out a different way. Jackie, one housekeeping thing. So we have this version dependencies direction page. I think I have enough content now between all of these issues that I could add some details to that. Maybe I could make an update and then share the MR with you, and we can adjust it accordingly.
Perfect.
Okay.
And then we can co-own that. That can be
okay.
Both of our babies. And then we can alternate months on who updates it.
Okay.
Do we want to create a label or something to make those issues easy to maintain and keep up to date if we do alternate months on updating the page there?
I think it would be like category version dependencies, maybe?
Right.
Okay, I could do that.
I mean, it is, since it is its own, I think it makes sense to have to fix all the right labels there so that we can pool it easily.
Agreed.
Okay. By the way, Nathan, you always impress me. You just pull up these issues and you bring all these things together. It's really impressive to see you work the way you do. So thank you for being on this call.
It's just all in my Firefox history.
But it's really cool that you just pull it out. It's impressive. I really do appreciate it.
One final question too, just about the link types. I just trying to think about I'm just imagining a future where like we could really have anything associated to like we could have a UX category, like UX designs, or I don't know, like, does it make sense to have this kind of finite list of things? Or like, are we just going to be constantly adding new items to this list? And what's the actual end result? Like, what does it mean when someone associates something as a package? Like,
so I think it's a good call out. In my past life, I owned social media postings, and we had this one list that ended up being 1,000 categories long, and it lost its value of being a pick list. The value in a pick list is being able to track your users' behaviors and see what they're actually associating to their releases. And if you end up seeing a bunch of others as a link, and they're only looking at linking others to the release, then maybe adding a configuration option to people to allow people to expand asset types by themselves is actually the best user experience we can offer. But since we're not tracking it today, and we don't really know how people are wanting to adopt releases, this is an easy hack to kind of track what things people are associating in a clean way. Otherwise, we'll just have to pull a bunch of usage pings and extract like each of the instances releases pages manually.
That makes sense. I can certainly see that from our side, why we would find that valuable. What's the value to the user to associate? Like what value do they get about associating something as a package or as a runbook or et cetera?
Makes it really discoverable for people consuming their releases. So if I want to see my packages as an asset type, instead of creating a new section, this was the MVC. So instead of spending a lot of time creating new sections, allowing them to make their asset lists more discoverable, an asset type would help that part. So this was like the first iteration to adding more sections to the releases page. Does that make sense? Because then if we start noticing that packages are the #1 asset linked type defined, maybe it deserves its own category, just like what Sean was saying. We just don't know if that category is viable yet, because we talk to like, 6 customers a week and ask them like, what kinds of things do you want to see on your releases page? And they're like, things people use. And then of course you can ask them a bunch of questions, but it doesn't give you an aggregate. And when people are forced to choose a binary or category, they'll pick the one that most matches their need first, and then they'll rely on other as like a catch-all. So that's the value they get, is if they're coordinating releases as a build manager, a release manager, or an orchestrator, they're able to categorize this endless list of links under the release page.
So we could start with a couple of pre-populated entries in the list and then allow them to do what they want.
Right.
And so that, does that mean then on the main page, the list page, we would just have the categories and then a number against each one, and then when you went to the detail page, you'd see the contents of those categories or lists or whatever we're going to call them?
The MVC today is just to have that exposed as an option, like in a drop-down menu. And then in the future, counters might be what we want, or we use those asset types on the view pages to populate the counters on the project landing page. But my first priority is to make the asset list more usable so people will want to use it, right? So I think for sure that can definitely be how we systematically update the project overview page for releases. But for now, it's just a drop-down menu.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
sense? The other thought I had too is that, the other thought I had too is that, like, currently you can associate a milestone with the release, and that's kind of like a system level association. If we just associate a package with the release through a link, that's not as strong of a connection. And I don't know if, for example, if package probably wouldn't be able to take advantage of seeing that association back to the release, which I think is something you guys are interested in, if I'm not mistaken. But so I don't know if we want to consider implementing a package through a more like a system level association.
That was actually something I was curious around, is if the list that we pre-populate should be the things that are coming from or built by GitLab, and then we can create those robust connections. So like Nathan was saying, you can go back to the package page and look at this version of the package and it says it's attached to this release, and that's makes it more discoverable both ways. And then you can see that auxiliary section of this never came from GitLab and you just uploaded it because it's a video game video playthrough, and that didn't come from GitLab but still attached to the release. So that becomes like the other section, and then you can start breaking that apart more later.
This is the dream team right here. Ian, I'm going to ping you on that issue for specify asset types. And if there's a resource that you can link there so that I can update the description and issue of like, if it's built by GitLab, what that means, and allowing users to populate that drop-down menu for that. And like the MVC is just to provide the drop-down menu. And maybe if it's built by GitLab, there's other things that are just going to come by that association. So like, are there links that we can then activate in the second iteration rather than, building out the scope in this first iteration too thick?
So maybe if we're not quite sure about the nature of that of that relationship between releases and packages, we should maybe not include it in that list that we're developing right now as a link, because that's kind of committing us right now to saying we associate packages through just like a plain text link and a description. What are your thoughts on this?
Can I ask I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how easy this is, but GitLab does this really cool thing where if I paste a link to an epic in a comment box, it'll automatically like shrink it down to the epic name and it links directly there. Is there a way that we can continue to have the same experience where users are adding links to the package, whether it's in the GitLab registry or not? And then later, because we have all of that data, if it is a GitLab link to a registry, we can create the association. And if it's not, then it just remains a link and it goes out to npm.js as an option moving forward. Keep it lightweight and easy and then try to work with it later.
Like if it has a relative link to GitLab versus not.
Yeah, something like that. I'm definitely not the technical person, but if that's the experience they're going through anyway, is I'm going to add a link to an asset that's somewhere else. And then that keeps with the similar user experience. And then later we, as GitLab, start to be a bit smarter and recognize that that link linked back to a GitLab package registry and create that more naturally for the user. Because then it's a surprise of like, ta-da, we did this really cool thing without a new flow, a new action, a new anything from their point. And also maybe more lightweight in terms of building out. We don't have to create an entire user flow for adding a package from the package registry versus if it's from a third-party source.
So on the runner package, or on the runner package, on the runner releases page, it does have like the parentheses external under links. Is there a reason why it has external? Is that their naming convention? Do you know, Nathan or Sean?
I don't know. I'm not close enough to how they do that actually, but I think they are all external. They are all hosted on there's an S3 bucket, I think.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if there's ever a case where there's an internal source.
Yeah, no, good question. I don't know. Sorry.
Are you talking about this external source thing right here?
Right. Like, does it let you know when it's internal?
I don't know. I've been meaning to look into that because the front end just gets, there's a flag external or internal that it comes with, and it's almost always external if you just add one manually.
Do you want to add this link, this gitlab.com link, and see if it populates anything different?
Sure. Let's see.
Such a bad product manager. I should have already done this. Sorry.
I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe that we need to look into that and see what that's doing. But Ian, to answer your question, I think that is a good option. And now that you say that, we do already have precedence for that because we already can like parse an internal URL and kind of understand what it means. So maybe that is a good way to go. Because that could be if we add it in the future, we already kind of can infer which packages they've associated.
So should it be a tech evaluation for when GitLab sources are linked to releases that it already creates that linkage natively?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out a good way to name this tech evaluation issue. So what I heard Ian say was that we would want to have GitLab releases recognize when a GitLab link is provided and natively support that connection between those two objects.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, I think that makes sense.
Alrighty, I will.
Sean, I think you're on mute.
Oh. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, if it's in the package registry, then we somehow nominate it. That is in.
I know we're at time.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say we might need a new symbol, like how we have the symbols with merge request and issue, exclamation mark, hash, etc.
Okay. So Tim, I'll open up that blog post MR for us to partner on that workflow, and I'll reach out to the customer on if they'd be willing to kind of talk through how they're using releases to distribute their packages. And then I'll look out for your version dependencies direction page update and contribute to that. And I'll create a couple of issues from this call, and we can begin implementing some of these things. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm wondering if we should check back in like in a month from now and kind of, well, because we'll have a lot of these updates and maybe some further thoughts. Maybe we could talk about scheduling for by the time 13.2 comes around.
Yeah, do we just want this to be a reoccurring monthly sync for us until we kind of figure out how we're connecting packages to releases?
I think that creating additional multi-stage usage is really valuable, and I think package and release are naturally connected. So I think it would be helpful, but if it seems like too much synchronous meeting or if it seems like a hassle, we could do it asynchronously. But I definitely enjoyed this, and I think it's good for us to think this way.
Any other opposition to that? We can always cancel if we don't have an update to make too.
I think it'd be good to keep going. There's still a ton of unanswered questions as to what this would look like in my head. So I think it'd be valuable to keep going for at least for the near future.
Perfect.
Cool.
Well, we have 2 MVCs to implement. I think the asset types and the generic package registry, I think, are the 2 from the releases side that will move this connection forward in the near term. And then the longer term is how do we create a more natural native experience between packages inside the releases page, I think is like the long-term view based on what I heard here.
The one question I have about that generic package registry, I think from our point of view, isn't it we're just uploading, we're just adding the ability to upload assets like an actual blob, right, to a release. So on the package side, is it more about tracking dependencies between blobs? Like, is that kind of the idea of the generic package manager? Is it's more about dependencies? Or is it still just about uploading blobs?
I think it's just still about uploading, yeah.
Okay. In my head, the real value of a package manager is that it manages all the dependencies of your of your blobs. Like you don't have to worry about managing all that. So maybe I don't quite understand the scope of that generic package registry, but it seems like it might be different than what we're trying to do.
I'll have to think more about that too. Yeah, I'm not sure.
We haven't really talked about it in that context, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we really just talked about it in terms of somewhere to just put all these blobs. But yeah, the relationships could be super valuable actually.
All right, perfect. I'll set this meeting up to be monthly, and I took notes in the issue, and so did Hyana. So if I'm going to parse back some of that information. I've already created several issues and just linked them to this ThinkBig issue, and then we can sync back up in a month.
Can I ask one favor, Jackie, as you've created all of these? Would you mind adding a ThinkBig label to all of those issues so that we can rock it and be like, ThinkBig is so successful because of these number of issues, because of this conversation? It really helps understand the value.
Some of them already had the ThinkBig from the releases ThinkBig session. So we have that one, but I can add the second one if that's valuable for us.
Do we need a ThinkBig : release? A scope for?
I like that. I think if it's scoped, then it replaces the other one though, right? So there can never be 2 ThinkBigs. You can only have 1 ThinkBig. Snooty.
We don't want to think too big.
too big, y'all. Too big. All right. Well, sorry for running y'all over. We'll talk soon. This was great. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.